Protests in the United States continue over the death of George Floyd, the black man who died as a white police officer kneeled on his neck. More than 18,000 National Guard troops have been deployed across 29 states. But right now, the demonstrations are largely calm.
Despite curfews in dozens of states, scenes like these were reported across the U.S. Thousands of people on the streets protesting police brutality and racism in the aftermath of George Floyd's death.
I'm tired, and I feel like this is worth it. People want to be violent, let them be violent, because we've been experiencing violence for the past 400 years. At some point, our lives are no longer expendable, so that's how I feel.
Despite that, there was a sense of quiet compared with the unrest of the past week, with far fewer reports of looting and rioting.
If it's okay with y'all, I'd like to ask for 30 seconds of silence for George Floyd.
In Floyd's hometown of Houston, more than 60,000 people, including his family members, took a knee in a poignant moment of silence.
Thank you.
And how much can a black person take? It seems like we always get the end of the stick when it comes down to fighting for what we want.
President Donald Trump's threats to bring in the military to quell violence have been slammed not just by political opponents, but by some of the United States' closest allies.
You've been reluctant to comment on the words and actions of the U.S. president.
The Canadian Prime Minister seemed at a loss for words when asked to comment on what was happening across the border.
We all watch in horror and consternation what's going on in the United States. It is a time to pull people together, but it is a time to listen. It is a time to learn what injustices continue despite progress over years and decades.
Pope Francis has also called for national reconciliation in the U.S. He says while racism is intolerable, street violence is also self-defeating.
For the latest on this story, Simon Marks joins us now from the United States. Simon, it's looking like a nationwide drop in violence, but can Americans breathe a sigh of relief just yet?
Well, there's definitely been a drop in the violence, certainly over the last 24 hours, Dawn. There's no question about that. Pepper spray and stun grenades were used in North Carolina. There are isolated reports of tear gas being fired in 2 or 3 other cities across the country. But overall, last night was a much better night in terms of tranquility than the country has seen for the last 7 or 8 days. But there are still all sorts of reasons, first of all, to be concerned about another spark, possibly leading to a flare-up in anger. And secondly, to realise that these protesters in many of these cities aren't going anywhere anytime soon. Nothing has been done yet by anyone to resolve the grievances that they're voicing. There are further potential flashpoints ahead. George Floyd's funeral is due to take place next week. Former Vice President Joe Biden, of course, the Democrat standard bearer in this November's presidential election, is expected to attend the funeral. It's being paid for by the boxer Floyd Mayweather. And here in Washington, D.C., at least the nation's capital, combat troops remain on standby to deploy at any point. There are images today from around the White House. It seems that the federal government has brought in federal prison riot police to police the streets around the White House. They're finding it very difficult to secure National Guard from neighboring states. The governors won't let the Trump administration access those National Guards from states like Maryland, Virginia and Pennsylvania. So they're having to turn to the available force that they've got at their disposal. And that, of course, in a city that is beginning to feel somewhat like a fortress, certainly in the downtown area around the White House, has the potential to fuel confrontation. So I think, again, every reason to remain absolutely on guard and for the authorities to be concerned about where all this could head in the next few days.
Well, Simon, speaking of Joe Biden, the protests, they're also becoming a point of contention in the election race as well.
Yeah, so, I mean, there were primary elections took place in 8 states across the country yesterday. Under normal circumstances, that's what we would be talking about tonight. Joe Biden easily expanding his lead in the race for the Democratic Party's presidential nomination, of course. To all intents and purposes, he's the only candidate still in the race, although there are some voters out there still voting for Bernie Sanders, even though he's abandoned his campaign. President Trump obviously dominating the Republican Party primaries that took place. I mean, there are issues here, of course, about how these primary elections are being held, about whether it's safe, first of all, as a result of COVID-19, now as a result of the instability on the streets of many American cities for these primaries to go forward, and ongoing questions about where America's electoral process is going to head for the rest of this year. President Trump, as you know, says that he's abandoning plans to hold the Republican Party's convention in Charlotte, North Carolina, because the governor there won't guarantee him that people won't have to wear face masks or engage in safe distancing in the North Carolina arena. So he's looking for another venue at a very late stage to host some kind of Republican convention. I think what we do know is that this election year, 2020 in the United States, is not going to look like any other election that we've witnessed here.
That's right, indeed. Well, we're going to see how that plays out. But thank you so much, Simon, for that. Simon Marks speaking to us from Washington, D.C.